Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today we're going to work on a project that Brian asked me to do. It's a Quantum Accurist. It's the 100 HPTA. Comes with the split diagram which shows you the schematics of it. And they just asked me to make a video of this so that he has it for future reference. And we'll know how to tune it up next time around. So we're going to start. This reel has a flipper feature to it. It can either be set for casting and then rebound with the turn of the crank, or you can move the switch and then flip, and your thumb pressure will be what restores the anti-reverse to it and allows you to do that. So nice function there. It has a 7-to-1, I believe, is the gear ratio on this. It's something, yeah, 7-to-1 is the gear ratio, so it's a high-speed gear ratio. Very nice reel overall. So we're going to show you how to take this apart, how to service it, how it's made, and give it a tune-up for Brian. And if you're thinking of buying one of these, by the time we're done, you'll see how it all comes together, and we'll get started. So we're going to get started by taking the external pieces and parts off. And while we do, I like to take that moment to thank our first responders and essential personnel, all the folks that are involved in keeping us safe during the pandemic, and all the people that are trying to keep it normal, which is the folks that are like teachers and food supply delivery folks and restaurant employees doing the takeouts and all the other pieces. And hopefully we'll be able to get back to the restaurants and the like in the real near future. So thank you all for what you do. A tension washer is under the handle. That's so that the handle doesn't press up against the star adjuster. Next up then, we're going to just kind of back off the star adjuster. That goes in a counterclockwise way. And you'll see that we have a hard washer under there. I'm going to put that right into the cap. And then notice the orientation here. There's another hard washer in there, and the bowl of this click mechanism sits up. You'll see there's a solid side, and there's a indent side. The indent side is what sits up in this reel. And then we have a small bearing shield beneath that, which sits on top of the bearing. All right, with that off, I'm going to put that back on. It's going to come off later, I guess, but just put that back on there for now. On this side, we have a little flip lever switch here, and that's going to enable you to open up the side plate. Just like that, you push in, and then a quarter of a turn, and then you can pull the whole assembly out. This has got a mag brake on it. It's got a bearing inside of it, so let's go right ahead and put some oil on that bearing. Which reminds me, Peter sent me a note on the Shimano. He said if you really want to make that Shimano with this the ceramic bearings scream, swap the one out on the spool tensioner and put it where the plastic bearing is on the spool. So stay tuned. We're going to do that one again. What the heck, it's my reel. We get a chance to kind of play around with that, right? All of my pieces go into a parts tray. It's the bottom of a milk jug, and that way I keep track of them as I take them on and off. All right, we should be able to remove the spool. Well, it wasn't a lock, it's just my feeling and balance. There you go. So the spool is going to go in there. I'm going to put that right back on. And then we'll get to the working side of this reel. Now, I recommend that you take pictures along the way whenever you're doing these projects. And that way, if you get stuck along the way, you can go back and look at what your pictures were, where they were, and you can make the adjustments accordingly. If you get stuck on reassembly, you just simply go in and look at the picture and then proceed again. I'm doing the pictures with the video. You don't need to use a video to get that done, but it is helpful. And if you want to just use still pictures, use your cell phone or your video camera or your traditional digital camera. All right, there's two almost micro screws here, and they're different, so pay attention when you're taking them out. This first one actually has enough bite that you could use a bigger screwdriver on it. The second one is definitely smaller. I'm just going to lay that on a bench for a moment just to make sure that I have that. And then this one's even smaller. Wow. There we go. So we worked it out with the flat blade. It is set up for that. Oh, now I got to go to the schematic. Okay, whenever you have a question, stop, go to the schematic, which is what I did, look, and you generally will find why you can't get this off, and that's because there's a screw hiding here in the case. So let's go ahead and grab that piece, and we should be able to remove the case after we remove this screw. I'm just going to, that's the same size screw as the other one, but I'm just going to put that off to the side. We should be able now to remove the case of this reel. Pay attention to that little flip bar there. Just pull that up now. You should be able to remove it. There you go. That bearing is kind of trapping it there. But here's your internal workings of the reel then. So let's push that bearing out first, because that bearing is going to need to be oiled. Let's see if we can't get that out. There we go. I'm going to give that a drink of oil. I'm going to use Real X oil here. I'm going to soak that bearing. Now there's a bearing shim on top and bottom, so pay attention to that. The first one I took and I already put in my case. So I'll put the second one there, and I'm going to actually take that bearing and I'm going to let that oil soak in there as well. We have Carbon Tex drag washers on this thing, so it doesn't look as though there's anything that needs to be done there. We are going to remove the main gear then. Oh. We have the washer on the back and the washer inside. We have the click mechanism. I'll lay that out. And now we have a bearing under here, so we're going to want to take this piece off to get to that bearing. As I mentioned, they certainly have you use enough tools in this this assembly here. So there's two screws that are holding this in. And I'm doing this upright because if I do it on the side, that screw will just spill out, and that'll make that a little bit more difficult. So we want to just kind of keep that all together there. It's going to be difficult enough for me with small pieces and parts. Just going to lay these pieces off to the side. That's the one screw there. We should be able to pull this whole piece up now and get to that bearing underneath. So that's the bearing we were working on. It also enables us to clean the inside of the case a little bit better. So let's go ahead and clean that off. I'm going to soak that bearing with some oil. Just let that sit. Come over here with my Q-tip and clean up the little bit of the extra grease that's underneath here before we go to reinstall. We have two small springs. Pay attention to that on the yoke. Those are going into my tray because I seem to knock small screws all over the place. You don't want to do that. We should be able to lift up the yoke now and clean this assembly. And I'm going to use the cotton swab for that. If this grease was particularly hard to get off, you could use a penetrating oil on it. In this case, just the paper towel and the cotton swabs are doing fine. Check the teeth on your pinion gear. These are clean and they are clear, so we don't have an issue with that. If you wonder about the orientation on the yoke itself, you'll notice that there's a ramp on the side here. That ramp is going to face the inner part of the case, and you'll also know that there's a cavity for those springs to rest in here. So if you put it down and you were wondering which way it goes, those are the two clues you have there about it going that way. All right, I'm going to open up my wheel grease. I use Pen Precision wheel grease for this, and we're just going to grease the pinion gear here. Make sure that it's got a nice healthy dose of grease. And we can go reinstall that onto the two pegs. We can put oil onto the mechanism that's going to trip that. The rest of the reel is clean, so we can go ahead and take the re-oiled bearing here, seat that. Make sure that your teeth mesh here. Those are Teflon gears. You do not need to oil those. Sometimes I get those comments, you forgot to oil. Well, you don't need to oil those. I'm going to put a little bit of grease onto the screwdriver to kind of hold that screw while we try and get them in. Those of you that know me and know small pieces and parts know that I do have some trouble with this. That grease tip that somebody brought along the way helps a lot. So let's go ahead and do that. I guess it also keeps the tip of your screwdriver from rusting out there. Alright, that part of the assembly is back in. We have our click ratchet that's going to be for the trip. You need to remember which side came up. This is the side the way it came up. If you had any questions about that, you could always go back and look at the orientation. Next then is this small washer in the back here. That was particularly stubborn. It got seated on there somehow. I'm going to use Cal's grease on that to make that a little bit more slippery. Just going to put a little bit on the side. We'll rub it in with my gloved hand. And before I reinstall there's just a little bit of residue sitting on that. So I'm just going to use some steel wool here. Clean that off. Make sure it's got the tension back on it there. Take your time with this stuff. There's no rush in reel repair. If you rush, you may overlook something or misinstall or have something that fails later because you didn't want to take your time with it. This can go either way. I'm just going to put that right back on the stack. We also have the one inside, so let's get that off. Look for a small screwdriver here. This one, it's the same thing. It's been sitting there a long time. It's lost its leverage. So I'm just going to be careful about this because we want to clean the inside of this main gear here and get all that old grease and debris off of there. And again, just take your time. Some of this is tarnish. It's not a problem. What is a problem is you can't see this, and that's unfortunate, but I'm just using steel wool, a little bit of rub action to try and clean this up as much as I can, and then we'll re-grease that washer there and get that back in. I think that's carbon text. It's hard to tell. I'm going to use the flat blade of a screwdriver. There's just a little bit more sitting on the fringe here, so let's just kind of use the flat blade, not aggressively, just use that flat blade to push off whatever pieces you couldn't get with the steel wool. Come on back in with a cotton swab, get that out of the way. Alright, this is a very hard washer, so it doesn't need grease, but they tell you if you do grease these, just get a light coating on it like this, a skim coating, and grab your paper towel and just kind of wipe it off. That'll give you a little bit extra slip on it. Okay, we can next check the teeth of the main gear. Appears to be a little bit of residue in there, so I'm just going to use a hard brush to knock that out. You can use a wire brush. You can use a toothbrush. This one's just one of these that comes in a set. They have a kind of a steel bristle brush, a brass brush, and a hard fabric kind of brush, and like a toothbrush. I'm just going with that. Now we're going to grease up the teeth of this. So much about the annual tune-up is just cleaning it, making sure that there's no broken pieces or parts, and just taking care of it so that it takes care of you during the upcoming season. That's the cap that goes on. There's a cap washer that is next. You can seat that. And then where you can just grab our 2 springs and we can reinstall. One spring goes on the one post. I'm looking into my parts tray. That's where you're seeing my elbow on the other post. Okay. And then there was 2 of these bearing sleeves, so one of them belongs on that cap on this side of it. Bearing has been oiled and has been sitting there soaking. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the bearing. I'm going to check the inside of the case. There's a little bit of buildup of some old grease, so I'm going to get that off of there. And there's another bearing in the tensioner area, so let's make sure that gets oiled. You don't oil the anti-reverse bearing. You make sure it's clean, and this one's clean, but you don't oil that one. Okay, this you can put that bearing back on the shaft here, or in the case. I'll go ahead and take the case now and put that over. Watch your little adjuster there as you go to reinstall the flip switch. Seat that, and then before I go any further, I don't want to lose that other little shim washer, so I'm going to put that shim washer here as well. That'll take care of that piece. There you go. And then we have those 2 outer case screws and 1 inner case. So remember where you took them. I took a bigger screw from the bottom and a small screw up top here. So I'm going to make sure that those go in first, and then I took the 3rd screw from behind the reel. Now if I had any questions about how I did that, I could go back to my video, rewind it, take a look. And it's kind of the same thing you can do with still pictures. Just take them at critical points. So this may not be a critical point here, but you know, at some point you may say, okay, I'm going to remove a piece here and I'm not sure what the orientation of that piece is. Let me go ahead and change up with that. Take that picture so that I know in the future. Alright, I'll get this one in. And we'll go on the back side and we'll do that. And we had the big one in the back. Now that was the same size screw as the other one. I did notice that when I came to do that. And we'll probably have enough grease left on my screwdriver here. Just maybe not. I'll try that trick again here. Let's get that in the hole in the back here. I'm not sure if you can see it. I'm hopeful you can see it. There's a that screw is hiding back there. That's why we couldn't bring the case off the first time. All right, this essentially is done on this side. The case is nice and solid now. I'm going to go ahead and put the nut cap back on this. And then before I go any further with the rest of it, I'm going to move this over so that I can have access to that pawl cap, because I want to get that pawl out of there and I want to make sure that it gets oiled. Generally, if you just kind of tap it gently like you just saw me do, the pawl will fall out. You want to inspect the shoulders. The shoulders are the 2 flat pieces along the ridge here of the cylinder, and you want to inspect the teeth. You want to make sure that that's all clean, and this is fine. This is doing what it should be doing. So we'll bring this carrier back here again. you want to remove the cap in the center where there's that indentation. And you may have to use and we're good there. Put a drop of oil on that. I'm also going to oil the worm gear. I choose to oil worm gears as opposed to greasing them, and the reason I do that is that there tends to be a lot of salt and debris and micro sand and things like that if it's being used in a dusty or a saltwater environment. A lot of that tends to accumulate in that grease. It gets trapped, and then what happens is the worm gear generally jams. Alright, I just have a little bit more. Don't over tighten these caps. I've seen too many of these caps break because people have wrenched them down, and they just they're pretty fragile. Alright, looks like our reel is doing what our reel should be doing, which is always a good thing. Let's go ahead and put the rest of this assembly back on here. Remember our click mechanism we talked about there. So we had the little bearing cap, then we have our click mechanism here. Now the click mechanism we mentioned has a couple of tension washers inside of it. Let's get those out. And it was sitting up in the piece. So we have the bearing, we have that little bearing shim, we have that cap mechanism, then we have two tension washers. They are cupped. They're not flat, nor should they be. These provide additional tension and flexibility and sensitivity to that star adjuster. They can be mated a couple of different ways, face to face, side by side, front to back. Choose which one works for you. I just put them back in the way they came out. But that will give you either a shorter throw or a longer throw in this, and you just have to be careful in doing that. Alright, we can put the star adjuster back on now. Then if you just hold it, you should be able to bring that little stud in there. There you go. You can hear the click mechanism working now. We'll come back to the spool. There's a bearing on the spool. We want to make sure it gets oiled. We have our magnetic drive of the assembly. We can put the spool in. And I'm going to trap that little piece of line there, aren't I? I don't like working on reels with line. I've mentioned that before. In this case, that drawn line looks like it wants to get trapped here. I think that's how I had trouble bringing it in. So if you can see where it's coming from, go ahead and try and work it out like that before you go in. Otherwise, your spool is going to jam and it won't work. We've oiled the back side of this. This is a very short turn, remember. So when you go to reset this, it's only off by a little bit, right? So once you have the side plate seated properly, you only have a short little gap here. All you need to do is just turn it and it'll lock right in place. Then you'll need to push that button to open it up again. Alright, let's give it a test. It's running very smoothly, very nice. You can adjust our spool tension if we like. Want to make sure that this assembly is working. Remember, there's a spring-driven piece inside here. If you don't have that spring set properly, it won't work. So we depress. We should have free spooling for a cast. And when we move that to flip mode, that should be the override. It'll allow you to spin it as long as you have thumb pressure on, and as soon as you have thumb pressure off, well, you're back to driving again. So that's all set properly. So this is the Quantum. It's the Accurist 100 HPTA. It's a 7.0 to 1 gear ratio with 7 ball bearings in there. And we've showed you how to take this reel apart, how to service it, and how to get it ready for the upcoming season for Brian. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please like it. If you want to see more, please subscribe. And if you do subscribe, please hit the notification button, as that'll keep you notified when I post new episodes. And I've been trying to post daily during the pandemic. And if you have any questions on this reel or any reel in particular, please leave them in the comments section. And finally, if you have a reel that needs to be serviced and would like me to work on that for you, please send me an email using the email address on the business card that follows. So this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.